I sit back in my chair with one hand holding a warm cup of tea and the other flipping through an old magazine I bought from the thrift shop on the corner. The cold November air comes in through every crack of my small apartment on the edge of Minneapolis. Outside my window, the gray sky looks heavy with snow, but it's strangely quiet. The phone rings, breaking the silence. I look at the screen. Dad. My breath catches for a second. I hit speaker, not letting myself hope for anything good. Emily, you don't need to come home for Thanksgiving this year. His voice says lightly, as if he were talking about something small like picking up toilet paper. For a second, I think I didn't hear him right. I'm sorry. What? We just think it's better if you stayed where you are. He goes on without stopping, like he practiced this speech. To keep things peaceful. Mandy's been a bit stressed lately, you know. I put my teacup down hard on the table. The sound of ceramic hitting wood is sharp and loud. Mandy again. Mandy, my sister, the princess who never had to be responsible for anything. Whenever there's a problem, everyone tiptoes around so she can feel comfortable. So what you're saying is, I'm not invited just because Mandy gets tense. I say each word slowly, trying to stay calm, even though my throat feels tight. My dad sighs. That special sigh of his that means, don't make this a big deal. It's just one day, Emily. You'll be fine. I stand up quickly, making the chair creak. Just one day, I repeat, my voice now as cold as the frost on the porch. You say that after I've sent over $4,800 to the house since January, just to keep the heat running through winter. Silence on the other end. Just the faint hum of the phone stretching between us. Don't bring money into this, he finally says, sounding flustered. You offered to help. I let out a dry, empty laugh that echoes in my room. Offered. In January, when the heating bill went up and you called at midnight saying the house was freezing, who paid it right away? Me. In March, when Mom cried because the furnace made noises, who called the repairman? Me again. And in September, when Mandy spent most of her savings on her podcast plan, who paid for the fall heating oil? Still me. He doesn't argue, just goes back to the same old line. Family is family, Emily. But this time, Mandy really needs calm. She's been through a lot. I look out through the foggy window where small snowflakes are starting to cover the walkway. I've been through a lot, too, but I was never given that kind of care. He tries to keep his voice even, but I can hear him getting impatient. Don't make this awkward. It's not personal. I take a deep breath, fingers gripping the edge of the table. Then don't expect another penny from me this winter. If I'm not treated like family, don't treat me like an ATM. I hang up before he can answer, the screen going black like my mood right now. Outside, the snow keeps falling silently, freezing but not quieter than the room I'm standing in. I sink onto the edge of the bed, hands clasped together. My thoughts all tangled up like the old cords in my kitchen drawer. That short phone call plays over and over in my mind. They really did it. Cut me out of Thanksgiving as easily as canceling. A dentist appointment. I look up at the small photo on my shelf. Me and my parents at Thanksgiving in 2019. I had just started my first job at the shipping company. Low pay, long hours. But I still caught a bus home just to sit at the table, eat Mom's roast chicken and listen to Dad talk about his team losing. That warm feeling now seems like a dusty old memory. I get up, walk to my desk and open my laptop. Wind howls outside, getting through the old window frame, sharp and bitter. I open the utility payment account I set up for them last winter after Mom sobbed on the phone saying it was too cold and they couldn't afford heating oil. I was the one who called the oil company every month. I was the one who paid every bill, over $2,400 last year and $4,800 this year, just for heating. I did, it not because anyone asked, but because I thought it was the right thing to do. I used to believe helping family through hard times came without strings, until I became the extra piece they could throw away. I look at the Excel file where I quietly wrote down every payment. The last entry reads, 10 months ago, $400 sent. Ahead of the cold season so they wouldn't worry. I wonder if they even remember. I watched Mandy burn through nearly $16,000 of my parents' savings in 4 months. Her homemade candle business sounded artsy until she ordered over 1,000 candles from a factory in Texas, put on a handmade label, and thought she could sell them for 3 times the price. No one bought them. The boxes piled up in the garage, and my parents, instead of holding her responsible, just shook their heads and said, "She's young. Everyone makes mistakes." I didn't say anything, just quietly sent more money to help them through winter. Meanwhile, Mandy kept posting pictures on Instagram. $7 fancy coffees, brunches with friends, wearing the newest clothes from the mall. Every time I scrolled past one, my hand would touch my back, still sore from working 10-hour shifts loading boxes. I almost texted to ask why, but then thought maybe it's something I'll never really understand or accept. I look back at my screen, the cursor blinking over the cancel service button. Just one click, and the system will stop automatic payments starting next month. I sit quietly for a long time. Not because I'm unsure, but because I'm letting myself remember what it felt like to matter to them. And then I click. A message pops up. Service will end on November 2nd, 4 weeks before Thanksgiving. I close the laptop and walk to the window. Snow is falling steadily now, each flake as light as my father's words on the phone. Except snow, when it falls long. Enough can freeze a whole house. They'll notice, but not right away. Mandy will keep thinking the world revolves around her. Mom will try to ignore it until her fingers go numb while making dinner. And Dad, he'll get angry like always. But he won't be able to deny he's the one who told me to stay away. Part of me feels empty, like I just let go of something important. But another part, the one that woke up the 3rd time I had to choose between buying a new coat or sending money home, feels lighter. For the first time in a long time, I'm standing up for myself. And I know this winter will be long. But at least I'm no longer the one shivering because of someone else's choice. Started waking up earlier. Not because my job changed, but because sleep hasn't felt peaceful since that call. In the days after canceling my parents' heating service, I carried a constant weight of both relief and doubt. But every morning when I get out of bed and my feet touch the cold floor of this small but peaceful apartment, I remember why I did. On November 2nd, I got an official message. The heating oil service for the house at 422 Elm Street had been canceled. I read that message while drinking coffee in my kitchen, my little space heater humming steadily by my feet. A quiet comfort. I bought for myself piece by piece through every extra shift. That day, the snow fell heavily. Minneapolis was already cold, but this year winter seemed to come a few weeks early. I thought about my parents' 2-story house, the house I grew up in, with its old roof and thin windows where the cold could get in after just one night without heat. I didn't feel happy picturing them bundled up in winter coats, but I didn't feel guilty either. It was time they understood that kindness isn't something they can take for granted, especially when it's treated like it doesn't matter. 4 days later, the first message came from Mom. "Emily, the heating system seems to be acting up. Can you check it for me?" I stared at the message, then set my phone down. I didn't answer. That evening, I got a text from Mandy, just one line, so childish. So selfish. No greeting, no question, just judgment as always. She probably thought I'd rush to explain or maybe even say sorry, but I simply turned my phone to silent. On the 7th day, Dad called. I let it ring until it stopped on its own. 3 minutes later, a voicemail appeared. "Emily, I don't know. What's going on? The house is down to 58 degrees. If you know anything, call me." His voice was sharp, angry, but also worried. I didn't listen to the whole message. Instead, I went to the bookstore on Lake Street, bought a new novel, and sat for hours at the cafe next door where the heater was strong, and the smell of warm cinnamon waffles filled the air. I let myself enjoy something I had always put off. Time for myself. On the 10th day, I got a call from a number I didn't know. It was the heating oil company. "Hi, is this Miss Emily? Are you planning to renew service for the house at 422 Elm Street? We haven't heard back from the homeowners, and the previous contract was under your name." I answered clearly. "No, the contract was canceled and will not be renewed. I'm no longer responsible for that house." "I see," the lady said, hesitating slightly. "So just to make sure you're not planning to continue payments?" I looked out the window where snowflakes were covering the street. "That's right." On November 14th, the messages started coming fast. Mom. "Emily, it's only 50 degrees in the house. Your dad refuses to wear a heavy coat, and Mandy's been coughing all day. Can you please call me?" "Dad, this isn't about money anymore. This is family." "Mandy," more bitter. "Fine, just pretend you were never part of this family." I read each message, didn't delete them, didn't answer. I just saved them as a record for myself of where I once gave everything and what I got back. On the 16th day, Minneapolis was hit by the first big snowstorm of the season. News alerts told everyone to stay inside. Some areas lost power for a while. I sat by my window wrapped in a thick blanket, hands around a mug of hot cocoa, the heater humming beside me. Outside, the wind howled through every part of the city. Part of me wondered, were they huddled together in the living room wrapped in every blanket they owned? Were they thinking of me, not as a money source but as a person, the one who had quietly kept that house warm for the past 2 winters? Maybe not. But I wasn't waiting for that anymore. I set my phone aside, pulled my chair closer to the heater, and opened my new book. My eyes paused at the first line. "You can't warm a place where they always saw you as the cold wind." And I smiled. Since the heating was cut off, the messages from my family increased with each drop on the thermometer. They all had the same tone: urgent, blaming, sometimes desperate. On November 17th, Mom texted, "Emily, it's 54 degrees in the house. Your dad keeps coughing and refuses to take medicine. Can you help? Call someone?" I read the message, then placed the phone face down on the kitchen counter. On my stove, a pot of potato soup bubbled, its rich smell filling my small kitchen. I stirred it slowly, the heat fogging up my windows. That afternoon, the outside temperature dropped to 25 degrees. The snowstorm came earlier than expected, wind pushing against rooftops, but inside my little apartment everything was warm and quiet. I put on my favorite sweater, turned on the oven for extra heat, and poured a cup of cinnamon tea. Somewhere else, I knew they were pulling out every thin blanket in the house, putting on layers of clothes, and turning up a thermostat that no longer worked. On November 19th, Dad called 12 times. I didn't pick up once. A message followed, short and demanding. "Call me back. This isn't a joke." I gave a dry laugh. To them, I was still the obedient daughter, the one behind the scenes, the one who fixed everything. They forgot that even kindness has its limits. That same day, Mandy posted a story on social media, a picture of her feet in thick socks with the words, "Cold enough to feel like we live in a freezer." I just scrolled past. I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't find it funny. I just thought it was true. They were living in a freezer they locked themselves into the moment they called and told me to stay away so Mandy could have peace. On November 21st, Mom called again, voice shaking. "Emily, it's down to 40 degrees in the house. Your dad's sleeping in a winter coat. My hands are so cold I can't even do the dishes. Can you do something?" I was making grilled cheese for dinner. The oven glowed orange, and the smell of melting butter filled the room. I didn't answer. That evening, I ate in silence, only the buzz of messages breaking through the quiet crunch of each bite. Each time my phone vibrated, I glanced briefly, a habit I'd formed over the past week, then went back to enjoying my meal. I wasn't glad they were suffering, but I wasn't sad either. I was simply living within the boundaries I had set after years of being seen as the family bank account they could use without even asking. On November 23rd, 2 days before Thanksgiving, a message from Dad made me pause while chopping onions. "Emily, if you still consider yourself part of this family, now's the time to prove it." I set down the knife and looked out the window. Outside, snow covered the porch and the neighbors' cars. I closed my eyes, picturing the old house where I learned to ride a bike, where I wrapped my first Christmas present, now sitting cold and silent. But in that vision, I no longer saw myself there. I poured more hot water into my teapot. As the steam rose, I thought about Mandy, who once told me I was useless for not funding her local fashion magazine idea last year. About Dad, who said I needed to stop being so sensitive when I mentioned always being left out of family talks. About Mom, who stayed quiet every time I was pushed aside just to keep the peace. I had been quiet long enough. That night I curled up on the sofa with a book in hand, covered with the light fleece blanket I bought last year. The room was lit by a single lamp, but it was enough, warm and peaceful. My phone kept ringing. I still didn't answer, because sometimes the only way for others to see your worth is to disappear from where they always expected you to be. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke before sunrise. The pale light came through my thin white curtains. Outside, snow had covered the steps, and the city was very quiet. No cars, no voices, just the wind whispering over rooftops. A gentle reminder that winter had taken over everything. I turned on the coffee maker and made myself a simple breakfast: crispy toast, peanut butter, and a juicy orange. I didn't cook a turkey. I didn't make the mashed potatoes Mom used to make. I didn't want anything that reminded me of the old kitchen where we used to crowd in on holidays. This year I chose simple things, not because I didn't have enough, but because I no longer needed to pretend things were the same. At 10:00 a.m., I was on the sofa, blanket over me, holding a hot cup of coffee, feet up on the table. A documentary I loved was playing on TV. Everything felt so peaceful I almost forgot the emotional storm of the past few weeks. Then the doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. I knew who it was before I even walked to the door. I looked through the peephole and wasn't surprised to see the familiar shape. A thick gray coat, red cheeks from cold and frustration, eyes still holding that look I'd known since childhood. Not sorry, but expecting. I opened the door slightly, warm air going out and hitting my father's thin face. "Emily," he said, his breath making small clouds. "We need to talk." I leaned against the door frame, hand still on the knob. "I don't think today's the right day to talk." "You cut the heat," he said flatly. "The house is freezing. Your mom's sick." She's locked herself upstairs. It's 38 degrees in there." I kept looking straight at him. "I didn't cut anything. I just stopped paying. Those are two different things." He frowned. "You know we're not good with tech stuff. The contract was under your name. When you canceled, the company didn't tell us because it was never in our names to begin with." "I handled everything for 2 years," I said. "Over $8,000. And then with one phone call I was cut out of dinner to avoid upsetting Mandy. So now maybe you should handle the rest." He flinched, like he hadn't expected me to remember every number. But I remembered every bill, every meal I skipped so I could send money. Every morning I waited at the bus stop in the snow just to make my shift on time. "Emily, don't make this more complicated than it is," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "This is all just a misunderstanding. It's just been a tough year. Mandy's been through a lot." I sighed. "Dad, Mandy's been through a lot because she puts herself there. I'm the one who gets pushed out." I stayed quiet when she blew all her savings on a creative academy she dropped after 2 months. I stayed quiet when she borrowed money and disappeared. But when I got excluded from a family meal because of her feelings, that was it. No more. He stood there in silence for a few seconds, then shook his head slightly, voice lower now. We have no money, Emily. We've sold nearly everything valuable. I called the heating company, but we can't afford the upfront cost. Your mom has a fever. We can't take it much longer. I could feel the cold coming through the cracked door, but I didn't move. You told me I should stay back to keep the peace for Mandy. I did exactly that. I stayed back. As for peace, I don't know about you, but I've found mine. He gripped the edge of his hood, eyes narrowing. You're punishing the whole family over one sentence said when I was stressed. I opened the door a little wider, letting him see the warm apartment behind me. The kitchen glowing, the neatly set table, the quiet hum of the heater in the corner. It's not punishment, I said softly. It's just letting you feel what it costs to push someone aside when you no longer need them. He stared at me for a moment, then turned and walked away, his footsteps crunching through the snow. I closed the door, the sound of the lock clicking into place clean and firm. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, I poured myself another cup of coffee, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was trembling anymore. The week after Thanksgiving, I got a call from Haley, my cousin who lives in southern Minnesota, one of the few relatives who still kept in touch with me despite not being close to Mandy. Her voice came through the speaker loud and clear, mixed with the sound of wind howling against her window. I just talked to Aunt Claire, Haley began, straight to the point. Things at your house are worse than I thought. I sat down at the dining table, holding a steaming cup of ginger tea, my eyes following the fog rising on the window pane. Mandy's moved out, Haley continued. Her new boyfriend just broke up with her. She crashed at her best friend's place, but they only let her stay for a few days. Now she's sleeping on someone's couch in Eden Prairie. I wasn't surprised. Mandy always had a way of making everything orbit around her until no one was left. The love she'd relied on all her life had finally run out with the cold wind. What about my parents? I asked, my voice calm. Aunt's staying in a cheap motel near Highway 52, the kind people rent by the week with walls thin as paper. I heard she's got a mild case of pneumonia. And your dad? Haley hesitated, then sighed. He sold Grandpa's old watch collection to pay for some temporary heating oil, but it'll only last a few days. I gently tightened my grip around my teacup. That watch collection was the only thing my grandfather had left behind, once displayed proudly in the glass cabinet in the living room, now being sold online like items no one cared about anymore. Are you okay, Emily? Haley asked softly, sensing my long silence. I'm okay, I replied. Just a little sad about how it all ended. I'm not, Haley said, her voice firmer. I think you did the right thing. If people only come to you when they need something, that's not family. That's using you. We chatted a little more before hanging up. I looked at the phone in my hand, the screen now dark, reflecting my face in the kitchen light. Not happy, not angry, just the clear understanding of someone who had finally stopped not because they were tired, but because they had gone far enough to realize they owed no one anything anymore. In the days that followed, I went back to my regular routine. Early mornings with coffee, work shifts at the warehouse from 7 to 3, afternoon stops at the local market for fresh vegetables and new pastries, evenings spent reading, listening to old jazz records, and occasionally calling Haley to hear stories from outside the family circle. Other than that, I heard nothing from Mandy, Dad, or Mom. The messages had stopped after Dad came to my door. The old house on Ashwood Street was now for sale on a local real estate website. Haley said they couldn't afford to keep it, not even with winter just starting. Sometimes I dreamed of walking back into that old kitchen, the one where Mom used to bake pumpkin pies, where I did my homework in high school, where Dad put the morning paper on the table every day. But in the dream, the kitchen was cold, dark, and no one was there. I just stood quietly, looked around, and gently closed the door behind me. I wasn't angry with them, truly. I wasn't. But I didn't feel sorry anymore either. Maybe because in the end, I had been cold and alone too, except I had learned to stand up and build a fire for myself. One night in early December, Haley called again. Her voice rang out between laughter and head shaking. "Emily, you won't believe this. Mandy's on the internet telling some sad story about being abandoned by family, like you're the meanest person alive." I raised an eyebrow. "She did what?" "Posted a video crying, saying you left your family during a crisis, but not a single word about all the money you paid or how they cut you out of Thanksgiving." I chuckled, a small smile without bitterness. "Let her talk," I said. "People will believe what they want. I don't have to prove anything anymore." Haley laughed loudly. "I love this version of you. Solid, unshakable. You're honestly inspiring." After the call, I made myself a cup of hot cocoa, sat by the window, and watched the snow fall slowly under the warm glow of the street lamp. The world outside was still cold, still harsh, but I had learned how to keep myself warm, from simple things, from clear boundaries, and from knowing that sometimes to live in peace you have to walk away and never look back. That afternoon, the snow was thick and fluffy, covering the small balcony where I kept a dried lavender plant. The city was silent in the -4-degree cold. No one went outside unless they had to. I was folding a freshly washed wool scarf when the doorbell rang. First, I thought it was a delivery, but then came a knock, steady, hesitant, that made me pause. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Mom. She stood there, bundled in a puffy coat that nearly swallowed her face, a wool scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. Snow piled on her shoulders and hat. She clutched an old handbag, her shoes buried deep in the snow, looking both weathered and unfamiliar. I hesitated for a few seconds before cracking the door open, leaving a narrow gap between us. "Emily," my mother said softly, her voice trembling whether from the cold or something else. I couldn't tell. "I'm sorry for coming without calling, but I didn't know how much longer I could wait." I leaned against the doorframe, keeping my distance. "Why are you here in this weather?" "I took the bus," she said, inhaling before coughing lightly. "Then walked the rest of the way. Took nearly an hour, but I thought maybe you'd listen to me this time." I didn't say anything, just waited in silence. "I've been thinking a lot about Thanksgiving, about all the winters before." She tightened her grip on the bag, her eyes on the tiled doorstep where the snow had started to melt into water. And I realized I was wrong, not just for what I said that day, but for all the years I let you carry everything and treated it like it was expected. I tilted my head slightly. For the first time in years, I saw my mother without the mask. No excuses, no smooth talk. Just a woman trying to find her way back from the path she'd chosen. "Mandy regrets it too," she went on. "She says things never should have gotten this far. She says, you don't owe anyone anything." I let out a dry laugh. "Too late, Mom. Everyone says I don't owe anyone only after I stop paying. Only after everything fell apart do I suddenly become someone worth caring about." "That's not it." She shook her head, her voice catching. "I just want you to know I understand now. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't stand by you sooner." I looked at her for a long moment. Those sorry words, if they had come years ago, they might have softened me. But now the wounds no longer bled. They had become scars, and scars don't feel. "You chose Mandy," I said slowly, every word as sharp and cold as the wind. "When I needed a seat at the table, you told me to stay back because Mandy was stressed. When the house was in trouble, I paid the bills, but Mandy was the one being comforted. When I started living for myself, You called it punishment. So what now? You're here to ask me to carry it all again? She looked up, eyes full of tears. No, I'm not asking you to come back for anything. I just want you to know you matter, and even if you never forgive me, I accept that. I didn't respond right away. I opened the door a little wider, not to invite her in, but to let her feel the warmth behind me, from the apartment I'd kept heated and peaceful on my own. So different from where she had come from. I'm not angry anymore, I said honestly, but I'm not the same person either. I'm not the last bolt holding the family together. I've stopped doing that, and I'm not going back. She tightened her grip on her bag, then nodded. I didn't close the door right away. We stood there a few seconds more, saying nothing, letting the wind blow between the silence. Then she stepped back and turned away. I watched her walk off, her figure getting smaller in the snow. When I closed the door, I didn't feel the lightness I thought I would, but there was no regret either, just a warm certainty, like the glow of the lamp in my apartment, that I had made the right choice. I returned to the sofa, pulled the blanket over myself, and turned on the old jazz track I'd paused. And as the saxophone played, I knew that for the first time in years, I no longer needed anyone's permission to live my own life. January passed in a soft, white blanket of snow. The city lay frozen in bitter cold, and I continued living at the quiet pace I'd chosen. My apartment stayed warm thanks to the small heater by the window, and the moments I spent making soup, toasting bread, or knitting scarves on lazy weekends. There were no more messages from Mom. The last time she came was right after Thanksgiving, and since then I hadn't heard a word. No blame, no begging, not even the usual New Year's card she used to send. I didn't feel sad about it. In fact, I felt relieved. That silence wasn't scary. It was like fresh air after a storm that had lasted for years. Haley still gave me updates each week, as if she were the only bridge left between me and the rest of the family. I saw Mandy post asking for help on a community page, Haley said during our most recent call. She said she lost her job, is looking for a place to stay, and mentioned something about cracks in family relationships. Same old blaming others. I didn't say anything. I just switched my phone to speaker and kept chopping onions in the kitchen. The smell of cooking onions filled the room, stronger than the story being told. Uncle Mark is trying to sell his car, Haley added. That old SUV still runs fine. I heard he wants the money to pay some overdue bills. Aunt Claire moved in with a relative in Des Moines. She said she needs time to think about how she raised her kids. Haley laughed without humor. A little late for that. Yeah, I replied calmly, but maybe better than never realizing it all. As time passed, things I once struggled with became clearer. Not everyone changes, and not everyone is worth hoping they will. Some things, once broken, are better left where they fell. Like cracks in winter ice, best not stepped on, not fixed. I no longer thought about Mandy every night, no longer checked social media to see who was saying what, and I certainly no longer felt the need to explain to anyone what I did right or wrong. I just lived, truly. Every morning, I woke up in this cozy apartment, reminded me that I was standing on ground I chose for myself, not on a shaky foundation built from someone else's expectations. At the end of January, I stopped by the used bookstore, down the block. The shop owner recognized me right away. Haven't seen you in a while, he said cheerfully. Braving the cold, huh? I smiled and picked out a novel about women who left their families to start over. When I got home, I placed the book on the table, boiled water for tea, and sat by the small electric heater. The orange glow lit up my face as I watched the coils warm up. I pulled my wool blanket higher and stared at the warm light. Steady, quiet, persistent. Just like me. Somewhere out there, the old house was probably still cold, Maybe they were borrowing space heaters from neighbors. Maybe Mandy was filling out help forms. Maybe my mother still wrapped herself in 3 blankets every night thinking about those dinners when we were all together, and the people who no longer wanted to be there. As for me, I no longer belonged to that old story. The heater hummed in agreement. I reached for my tea, the steam making my vision blur for a moment, though my heart had never been clearer. Winter would last, snow would fall. But this time, I wouldn't be the one shivering. I had chosen peace, and I didn't regret it. From my story, I've learned that not all family ties are worth keeping at all costs. Some lines, once crossed too many times, must be drawn again with firmness. I once believed sacrifice meant love. But really, giving everything without conditions only teaches others to value you less. Now I no longer seek approval from my family. I live for myself, and that is the most freeing thing I've ever done. What do you think about Emily's decision? Was she too harsh, or was it what she needed to protect herself? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to follow for more emotional family stories.